Esteemed colleagues, good afternoon. We continue working, and now we will have a session that is called Digital Financial Services Standards, and I will tell you a few words about what we will be talking about. It's not a hype thing, as we heard it yesterday when we launched spaceships with the help of digital technologies. A lot is happening like this, on the verge of the truth and imagination, science fiction, but our topic is very important from a practical point of view, and we would like to talk today about the advantages for consumers when we use digital technologies, and also the risks that are inherent in this process. And if we do not pay attention to the benefits and threats for consumers, then we will end up in negative consequences. And if a consumer is disappointed by the digital services, and if he or she doesn't trust these services, and they wouldn't like to work in a remote mode, we understand which consequences it may have. And in the course of the plenary session, we have already talked about the risks, and we will go back to this topic today. And we should not forget about the advantages and potential benefits that it could bring for consumers. And during this session, which is a rather short one, 1 hour and 15 minutes, we'll try to cover the main aspects. And now I'd like to introduce our today's speakers that will participate in this dialogue. My name is Mikhail Mamuta, and I'm the head of the Service for Consumer Protection and Financial Inclusion. And I'm also the member of the board of Bank of Russia, Mr. Viktor Dostov, chairman of the board, Russian Electronic Money and Remittance Association, and he's one of the leading experts in the ambit of the regulation and digitalization. Mr. Damir Galiev, head of the project office from Akbars Bank. Alexander Chernoshokov, the senior president of the SMEs department of Pромsvязь Bank, and Mr. Yarovoy from Sberbank. He is the managing director. Natalia Puzyrnikova, executive vice president from Gazprom Bank. And we also have with us a few experts that I hope will help us to find right answers to the questions. Maxim Grigoriev from Gartner. He has worked for many years in the Bank of Russia, and he knows a lot about digital financial services. And Sergei Rusanov, member of the board of Открытие Corporation, he's with us today. So first of all, I'd like to point out the directions for our discussions. Where is the clicker? How can I manage my presentation? Viktor Leonidovich knows that. You should take all the clickers, and then you feel safe and secure. So you are dependent on digital technologies. You should be holding something in your hands, and then you feel cozy and convenient. When we started discussion the protection of consumers in these digital services, we thought that it would be an appropriate thing to elaborate a standard that would set the framework for interaction in digitalization between consumers and suppliers. And we did that together with the Association of Financial Technologies, and it unites all the market participants in the financial sector and these digital services. And when we set the goal, we have had a look at the advantages and disadvantages of digitalization. There are a lot of advantages. First of all, in expanding the outreach and increasing the accessibility and inclusion. It can be rendered whenever a person needs that. The most important thing is to have 3G and 4G and access to the internet. Of course, that's natural, and it increased and improved the transparency of the flows, and also cost reduction, because digital channels are less expensive, and the international studies show us that there is a cost reduction, and it brings benefits for consumers and for all the other participants as well. And also we open a niche for services for disabled people who have serious problems with their health that cannot come to an office all the time, and also the possibility to provide consultations to consumers in an online regime, and it is a broader range of possibilities. As of today, we have had a look at international experience. A number of financial inclusion standards have been implemented at the level of G20 and OECD. They have published a guideline for the protection of consumers' rights in the digital epoch, and FATF, that is combating money laundering and terrorism. They have also published their rules and guidelines for this aspect. And in the framework of a Financial Inclusion Alliance, I have a working group that is protecting consumer rights in financial sector. In 2016, G20 published 8 standards for financial digital inclusion. They described structurally what I have already talked about, and they set a high-level approach to financial digital inclusion. And if we talk about the risks, there are quite a lot of them. It would be a right thing to say, and we point out some basic risks. The first risk is the following one. In the digital sphere, the same applies to offline and online regime. You can provide the wrong information to the consumer, mis-selling and providing misleading information, and this problem exists nowadays. And the second problem is about personal data, working with personal data. I will not go deep into detail, the leakage and the robbery of the data and unsanctioned use of this data. And the third problem is the problem of the interface. They are not always user-friendly, always understandable, and the convenience for consumer is also very important. And redress, that is the fourth one, the mechanism of complaints and the method of how you can get money back. And I can note that I have my personal experience. It is not an experience of financial sector, but still, I bought something for my guitar in a British online shop, and I understood that I bought the wrong thing, and then it took me a lot of time to find a button to get back, and I didn't find the button, and then I found the button to complain, and I pushed the button. It took me 10 minutes to push other buttons, but then I got back to the main page, and I drew the conclusion that was the conscious approach, and it was very complicated for a user to complain or to get back the service or the product, and I was disappointed, and I thought that when we elaborated the standards, we should pay special attention to the interaction mechanism, because some online shops, they do not have their office, their branch office. Everything should be done in online regime. So we set a task of elaborating the necessary standards with the definition of financial service, the minimum volume of the information that will be rendered to a consumer, how it will be rendered. Also, we specify the requirements for the vendor, for the supplier, and also the principles of interaction and the complaint mechanisms. We have worked out these standards, and quite recently it has been approved in the framework of ATF and our working group, and should be applied by the members of Financial Technologies Association and for other potential participants of the market. What is important there? It's a voluntary consent as we see it as of today. It's not an obligatory standard, it's a recommended standard, and at this stage of the market development we hope that it will be sufficient, but after some time, maybe in 1 year or in a few years, we will have to elaborate a law or some legislative acts for this ambit. When the market is developed, we cannot sacrifice and we cannot undertake risks for consumer rights, and I'd like to ask our speakers about what they think about the whole process, because they're actively working in this sector and they're bringing benefits and additional convenience for consumers, but they face all the risks that we are mentioning here, and we would like to understand how you are controlling these risks, and I'd like to give the floor not to the market, first of all, to the expert level, to Mr. Viktor Dostov. Viktor, could you please share with us the results of the international research, financial inclusion, and the protection of consumers? Could you please share with us the main conclusions and the main challenges? And probably that will be useful information for us. And please be brief because we have the time limit. Thank you very much. Mikhail Valerievich has facilitated my task because he has already mentioned a huge volume of analytics that we used in our work. Well, I have not seen that. And I'd like to use my time for expressing the following thought. At Phenopolis, we are discussing that the bank world will change in 2-3 years, and we see clear, understandable processes that now have come to the banking sector, the verticalization, the commoditization, and all the others. And everybody sees that. And we have some people who are extremists, as me and Pavel, and then are post-industrialist banks. And people are more careful, they are more circumspect. And we mentioned that at our plenary session. And Mikhail has already talked about the risks. And I'd like to note the following. Sometimes new technologies and new trends are bringing along a brand new level of consumers' protection. And I can give you a simple example of Uber. I would like to ask young people who consider themselves young to say, what does it mean to have a meeting in 2 points, in 2 directions? Who thinks that they are young in their spirit, or are young in their spirit? Yes, we have young people here. At less than 3, I will not go. I will not take. You are from St. Petersburg, and you have your own peculiarities. I'd like to say that, in spite of the complaints about Uber, that Uber is protecting consumers much more efficiently than the traditional model of taxi, and we could not have imagined that 10 years ago. And now, turning to the new models at the financial market, I'd like to briefly talk about this. Talk about the international organizations. Of course, huge work is ongoing, it's useful, and it is done in the right direction. Nevertheless, we see the shift in the priorities. Now we see systemic processes that we didn't used to have 2 or 3 years ago. Now is the responsibility to provide basic services. We are talking about non-cash economy. If tomorrow we have it, and what will happen with people with a bad criminal history, with the accusation of money laundering, and the banks will not open accounts for them? And they will fall out of the society, of the community, and everybody understands it's the processes in the European countries. We see that you should have an account, that is a requirement. And talking about standardization in the financial market and payment account directive in the European Union, the banks are providing the same services without standardizing them, and the consumers have to read this loan contract, and when they sign a contract for the credit card, then in a month he can find out that he did not sign what he intended to sign, and in Europe it will disappear. They will have something like Yandex Market, a standardized website for services, and it will be a transparent structure. We eliminate the source of the problem, and then we will not have to protect a consumer additionally. Talking about financial inclusion and consumer rights protection, now we see two trends and two categories of clients: the emerging countries with emerging financial sector and the developed countries. And everybody understands that we have to resolve various tasks. We see the problem in the EU, the clients, and getting back to the cash and non-cash settlements. We know the example of Scandinavia. They reached the level of non-cash sector, and some people, they cannot live in this world, and they introduced obligatory requirement for non-cash operations, and now they're doing it vice versa. So which conclusions do we draw here? They are quite simple. We are shifting from financial to digital sector, and we have to be literate there. And the banks are preserving the infrastructure. It's very important from the point of view for financial inclusion. And we see the revival of the idea to open the branches. I think it's a temporary idea. And the general trend is that the physical branch offices will be eliminated, and pensioners, where they will come to, we do not know yet. Should we preserve the infrastructure, and who will fund it? We'll fund it for the vulnerable group of people, and how will we cross-subsidize it using the funds of our clients? And the financial services are becoming a social service, and they do not resemble the traditional banking service. They look like a kindergarten and a school, and the tools to regulate the process and to protect the consumers, they should be taken from the polyclinic, from the hospital, and they follow this model of the social benefit and the state regulation.
I would like to say another two brief things. We are in favor of rather rigid regulation, strange as it may seem. If we recall the plenary session, a lot was talked about banking slavery. We are trying to promote the idea of transfer of accounts by analog with telephone accounts. Well, the banks understand that people have to get their salaries. A transfer from one bank to another is difficult, and many people cannot cope with that. To make an easy transfer of account from one bank to another by pressing one button like they did in England will increase the quality of services and reduction of problems that require protection of customers. And since fintech is everywhere, I don't like novelties because people start to wear brown shoes with a gray suit. But nevertheless, innovations are inevitable, and I would think about unpractical ideas. So imagine that we do have an economy that is based on distributed networks without a centralized institute. So after this session, just think about how, without centralization institutions, how can you protect the customers' rights? I think that would be a very good exercise, and if we think a little bit about it, we'll become smarter, and probably my presentation will not be wasted. Thank you. Well, I want to applaud. Although when you mentioned brown shoes, I involuntarily looked at my own shoes. Well, like a true person from St. Petersburg, I checked it that I will not offend anyone. But you've touched upon several very important ideas in your presentation, and probably the speakers will revert to these ideas in their presentations. And I wrote down one question, and I will ask it at the very end. Thank you for this overview, and let's talk about the practical perception of the subject. And I would ask my colleague from Agbars, Damir Galiev, I want to ask you, how, in your approaches to the digitalization, how do you change a format of communication? Because digitalization doesn't only mean a new channel, it changes the way you work with the consumer. You cannot work in online like you are working in offline. And how do you create an environment without barriers? That's a very popular subject. Some optimists think that the digital ways really solves all problems, but then we come to understand that there are difficult types of disabled people, for instance, and we discussed the fingerprints and veins, which may not be suitable for certain people for certain reasons. I know that's a very interesting subject. I know you're working hard on it, so share your experience, please. Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to note that our team, which promotes change, recognizes that standardization is inevitable, including that in services. There's a vivid example of standardization in UI, and UX will be standardized just like that. You remember 5 or 6 years ago, mobile banks' interfaces were drawn arbitrarily, but now a lot of people try to stick to some straw men, and we find ourselves in the same environment in different banks. The functionality is the same, and the differences are only in services and probably in the specific features of the financial institution, what it focuses on, and what financial metrics it uses. So we and our partner understand that the standards that were talked about, this artifact, is very important, that it has a final value, not an interim value, because by learning what's described there, you can understand what functionality is missing in order to cover the needs of the customer fully. A vivid example from Europe, when one of the banks optimized their interface for people with poor eyesight. And for clients who have problems with eyesight because of their age, they became a focus bank for this type of clients, and that actually helped them to earn some money. But the earning money was not the end goal. After this experiment, this UX direction was copied by other banks. Coming to practical subjects and to the core of the matter, we make a focus on the e-commerce, transferring not only service lines there, but also our sales directions. We do not only try to set the standards, but at least to use better practices to help the customers to see their feedback and to offer that experience to our partners. Because Akbars is a group, we have an insurance company, we have an investment company, and creating some experience with our clients, we upscale it in our group, and then we start to offer it to our partners. I could mention the state service portal as one of the first examples where our experience has been used, and therefore it's not a standard as such, but there's a possibility to get the maximum feedback. And the second change that is intended to develop services for the population with impaired abilities, that's the development of geometric solutions, and we are experimenting with something which is to pay, which is a validator of payment. You don't have to have anything except your face, and we are trying to integrate this thing into access systems. So the user experience will be as follows. You do not only enter a no-barrier environment, but you consume services that are related to finance, because we're talking about financing. And then you can use this picture for calculating loyalty, for the analysis of social and demo, and collect the feedback online. So that's what we're working on now, and that really matches the standards and the artifacts that we're talking about, and possibly we'll also be able to provide some recommendations that may be part of the standards, and all the market will get that experience, and the life of clients will become simpler and better. Thank you. You are being very optimistic. You know, when you said, well, that was a phrase, and I think a lot of people respond to that, that the person has only to bring their faces. I recalled a movie called Without Face with John Travolta. That was a nice. So whoever comes with your face tomorrow to the bank. I wanted to ask you, since you're developing digital as communication channels, and can you say that thanks to the digital counteraction, the satisfaction of the client has grown, or is it too early to compare the usual interaction with the digital interaction? Well, the digital interaction are easier to calculate, and probably if you've made a mistake, the digital channels provide much more reliability with the feedback. While we're talking about the mass segment, in the more privileged segment, the face-to-face interaction is more important. Thank you. We'll be watching the development of user experience, digital user experience models. And my next question is to Natalia Kozovnikova from Puzornikov from Gazprom Bank. The bank is doing a lot to make it easier for the client to counteract through a digital channel. But what the bank is doing enough? More friendly interfaces, guessing what the consumer wants, or the consumer should do something to make this relationship more comfortable? Thank you for the question. Really, if you look at the source of risks in digital services, there are several. And there are several points where potential problems arise. And certainly one of those points is the bank and the applications. When the bank is not protected enough, can access maldoers to this client or to services that were requested not by the user. But there's another point for where the problem arises, when the client himself, willingly or unwillingly, does something which results in the client losing money. And there's another example from social engineering, when people, or people, provide criminals with their bank card data. I would like to provide an example from the corporate clients world, which is unexpected. We see that the clients who are using digital channels for interacting with banks, in their system, they, for instance, create a number of payments in one S system. For instance, they transfer it to the banks, and we see with a surprise that there is a strange counterpart in that register. What happened? It's easier to hack the client's side for the hackers. Clients do not understand that you can create a company with a similar name and with a different tax number, and they transfer it to the bank, and the bank must perform that transaction. We can suppose that the transaction is faulty. Talk to the client and find it out. Otherwise, we have to provide for that transaction. Certainly, that means we need to educate the clients, and certainly we must watch that for mis-selling. So the bank must understand that the client understands what they're doing, why they're doing, how to use it, what risks are related to that transaction. We're planning next year to do that, to make that our slogan in educating our clients, and I think that the financial market should go into this direction, profiling clients from the standpoint of what service we can correctly offer to the client. If the client doesn't use internet payment, maybe we should switch off this service so that the criminals cannot use this loophole. So it turns out that the vulnerability on the client side may be more dangerous for the client than the vulnerability on the bank side, because you protect your clients, you protect the banks better. But that actually brings us back to the issue of financial literacy, and this interaction means that the person should understand the risks, so that they don't make some fatal mistakes. That's an untrivial question. If you enter financial literacy improvement in Yandex, what will be the top 5? Well, the central bank side? No. You will get approximately the following. Financial literacy is very important. It is very important today, and if you click on that, they will suggest that you invest into cryptocurrency free of charge. And there will be another phrase, it is that only the financial literal person can earn money with that. That sounds funny, but that's true. We have a replacement. And why is the digitization different? Because some of the notions are substituted for other, and people are drawn into, well, something like, we will teach you how to earn money with high-risk instruments. So I need to ask Sberbank, because they are digitizing very actively, are you not scared of digital investment in high-risk instruments? And are there any limits to what can be sold digitally to persons if we're talking about an investment product? Or is there some threshold when you need the customer to come to your office, pass through risk profiling, and find the ideal financial instrument? This is not a trivial question, Vladimir. I hope you will be able to answer. Well, I will start from afar. Before talking about financial products, I would like to continue the discussion about the digital standards, whether they are recommendations only or mandatory. And I think the Sberbank approach is correct, and the colleagues have already voiced it. You must start with the client. So if you make very thorough standards, do this and don't do that, that will be wrong, because digital technologies are very transparent. You can always look at the application rating. You can read comments about the service. You can always spend some time, if you wish to, and learn about who liked this service, who didn't like it, and why. So we should start with the client, and certainly that missile vortex will always be there. So we cannot exclude it 100%. And the objective of a financial organization or of any supplier of services, of digital services, is, well, it doesn't really matter what is the financial knowledge of the client. So your task is to make the client happy. Talking about teaching the client is equal to teaching them to sell cryptocurrency. And many people don't want to be taught. They have different needs. They want to get some value.
Some kind of value, and we should give them this possibility. And now, going back to answering your questions about financial tools, here is a similar approach. We should start with the client, and we should understand, first of all, his goal, what he would like to get, and then understanding the goal and analyzing data. It is very easy in the digital sector. You understand which tool can help you to achieve this goal and to structure the path for the client in order for him to be satisfied with the quality of the service. So I'd like to say that if a client is not satisfied, it always poses a problem, a threat for organization, no matter whether it is a big organization or a small one. And we are not talking, of course, about monopolies, but generally, if that happens, you are losing your business. This is the truth. And in the digital sphere, it happens even faster. I would like to disagree with what Victor has said. The transfer of an account is a problem. I don't see any problem in that. I wouldn't like to advertise anything. But, you can order a credit card 24/7 regime, and it will be done almost instantly. Of course, it's about the cost of transaction. Everybody wants to get it free of charge, but it's not possible. Somebody has to compensate this. For example, if we take Tinkoff example, the incoming account is free of charge, but somebody is always paying for that. It's free of charge for the client, but not for the vendor, not for the supplier of the service. That's why when we talk about facilitating the industry and investing in providing a client with a faster operations and doing that instantly, we do not set this goal. We set the goal of providing the level of service and convenience for the client to stay with you in order to retain the clients that you have, because they can try to get a quasi-service, but the quality is low. Summing up, I'd like to say that we adopt the following approaches that I've underlined. Why are user interfaces similar to each other? We can introduce a standard and say that you have the button, transfer, and apply top parts. And clients got used to an interface, and the industry is trying to adjust to it. And if a client sees that it's not convenient for him or her, they will not choose it. And that also starts with the client. And this is the shape of the screen. This is the way we should do that. And this is the interface we should provide for the client in order for him to stay with us. So we should offer client these digital services that are growing, developing very fast. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Maybe we'll have a face identification, and maybe the veins will be used to identify clients. That we will learn tomorrow, but we should set the standard that will not impede the process of development. A client can choose what he likes and use the best option, and then tell others that that is the best option. Vladimir, thank you. I'd like to ask you a clarifying question, more detailed one. As you see it, in order to sell an investment product to a client and to shape his investment strategy, in order to get him profiled, does he have to go to the office physically and to talk to a manager? Or you can do that in a remote mode, in an online regime? Yes, it can be done. I would like to add the experience of Sberbank, an interesting experience. As mobile banks were developing, clients were afraid in this digital sector to use such services as deposits. Now it seems to us an easy task to open a deposit account. That is a traditional operation, but when a client faces that for the first time, the credit organization, even in a large organization, Sberbank, the clients worry whether they did everything right, pushed the right buttons. So we cannot say that in digital services clients start straight away to transfer large amounts of money and investing in large volumes. It does not happen overnight. It's an evolutionary process. It is about the interaction with the persons, the physical interaction. First of all, a client gets his experience, and then in an evolutionary process they get other services as well. And when this service becomes an everyday service, a traditional operation with traditional financial tools, then clients get used to that, and they do not fear it anymore. And the responsibility of a financial organization is to build the system based on the goal of investment and the knowledge about the clients. We should offer the products that will be interesting for him or her. I express opinion poll for the audience. Esteemed colleagues, who is ready to buy investment product without seeing seller? For example, if they propose that to you via the phone, yes, I think that this is a good pool for investment possibilities. Who is not ready to do that? Very few people, without knowing who is selling their product. Yes, without seeing them. Yes, we see that there is no serious barrier in terms of the mindset. Does not exist. The mental barrier is a serious story. Even if you understand how it is operating, you may not be psychologically ready to do that, because they can be afraid of pushing the button in order to transfer money. And it's a justified fear, because you don't understand whether there is a button that you may push in order to get back. Many people do not trust digital channels, and I saw the research that was done in the US, and it was about the trust of the society towards digital channels. Which category, middle-aged or young people or senior people, who showed the least trust in that? Senior people, Maxim, young people. It's a surprising story. 16 to 20 years, they did not trust the digital services, because they see and they suffer from frauds in money transfer and remittances and social networks, and they have an instinctive fear that it may be a fraud, and they would like physically to come to a bank and to speak to a person who will sell them services. It's not a simple story. This is the mental willingness and the mental readiness of the society and the trust. And now I'd like to change a little bit the vector. Before, we have talked about digital services for consumers, for people, but it's obvious that there is a huge potential, a very huge potential for SMEs. But there are some specific risks that it entails. I'd like to ask Alexander Chernashok a question. Know that PromSves is experimenting in this direction a lot in the model of financial services clients for SMEs. I'd like to ask you how you assess the current situation and the prospects. Can these services for SMEs become totally digital? What is your opinion about that? Well, I would like to give you a specific example with some figures. We regularly convey, together with the poorer Russia, an opinion poll among SMEs about their attitude and structure PMI for SMEs, and one of the sections is about the accessibility of loans. And generally, these opinion polls show that 60 to 70% of SMEs wouldn't like to take out a loan. They do not go to a bank for that. And why is this happening? We're trying to analyze this. Bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork, it is expensive and a very long process. A number of arguments are given. Any digital solutions in this sector helps to make these services more accessible. A year ago, we set a task to do the online loans, to provide online loans to the clients. And it would take a client 5 minutes to be granted a loan. Now we have about 200,000 clients, and about 10,000 have taken out the loans, and we can calculate the penetration in this segment. A lot of companies would like to take out a loan, and in the course of 6 months we launched this product, and our goal was for the client to have 2 screens on his mobile devices where he chooses the terms and conditions of the loans, and then he consents to the contract, signs it, and then he gets the money. So this is the total process of granting a loan, and it takes 5 minutes. And as a result, the number of companies that got the loan increased by 30%. And we proposed 40 different loans. And the feedback was quite positive. In terms of the impact on the economy and the development of SMEs sector, I think it was a very positive movement globally. Digital solutions for SMEs are very important because the bank facilitates the whole operations, and it increases the penetration of digital services in general. Another question is in line with our discussion today: how can we protect SMEs' rights in these processes? Do they know what they are doing? Please raise your hands. Who reads the license agreement when you set up a program? 2 people, okay. What about the loan contracts? Please raise your hands who have read it up to the end. A lot more, but still not everybody. You can ask them when they are entering the hall, not afterwards. It's a very important question, because when we talk about the protection of SMEs' rights, we did it like this. They agree with the rules of granting a loan, and we posted that on the website. You can go there and read them. Still, there is a problem. That not everybody reads a contract they are going to sign, or they read them very quickly. From the point of view of financial literacy and protection of rights, it's about a person realizing what he is doing, and then the interaction with the appropriate organization is structured. When we speak about private individuals, the risk is not very high. But when we deal with SMEs, the risks are much higher. And the risks are different because we are talking about a large amount of money and other aspects as well. On the part of financial institutions, it's very important to educate people. In parallel with a online loan, and we launched overdraft online. These are different products. We spent a lot of time in educating clients about the difference between online loans and online overdrafts. And out of these 3,000 clients, 95% of clients did not take any loan before. You open an access for clients who come to you for the first time, and you should explain to them what is the payback period, and you make them understand that they should pay back. And it's a very important role in raising awareness about this and educating people. You can sell something to a client that does not realize what he is doing, but you will not do that for a second time. And we are talking about a longer-term prospect of interacting with the client. We should make them understand which product they are using and all the peculiarities it may have. That is how I envision the protection of clients and the consumers of financial services. There are financial institutions that are planning to be operating on the market for a long period of time. They should focus on that, both for private individuals and for business entities as well. I have a following question. Do you assess the satisfaction among SMEs? What do you see there? The more we penetrate with traditional product into digital channels, the more satisfaction among SMEs we see. Because an example of online loans, it's an obvious story. A certain period of time, the clients were not satisfied with traditional products, and then they turned to online loans. And the digital settlements, that is the thing that was introduced by many banks quite long ago. And as for the level of satisfaction, it is more now about the speed of how it is done, how fast it is done. But as for other products, the more digital services we have, the more satisfaction we get. Okay, thank you. It's very interesting. I think that SMEs are quite grateful because they do not have time to go to offices. And I know that the remote interaction is very important for them. And they do not understand, they do not need to go to a branch office of a bank with a payment request. And I think that in 3 to 5 years, all the interaction in SMEs sector will become digital. We are moving towards the business entities being the digital clients, and the SMEs will greatly benefit from that. I'd like to say a few words about the digital profile and all the other related things. In protecting the rights of SMEs is about the following. The transaction activities, we know about that. The banks have the data about the turnouts, and they know about the volume of money that they're investing. And respectively, they are using this data. And they are trying to get the profit. That's an indirect thing for SMEs. So we have to provide an equal access to data, to the information in the tax authorities, in the bank, and also managing data is the key thing for SMEs to get this right back to them. And at a certain point of time, they will buy the right to do that for these people. Okay, thank you.
Well, let's see how it goes. My next question is to Sergei Rusanov. The Открытие group is keeping pace with everyone and trying to be within the trend. You work digitally with the consumers and with SMEs, and Mr. Cherkasov said that you have big plans for this segment. But my question is, well, developing digital channels, how do you try to provide for the interests of the other side, of the consumer? Maybe it's a philosophical question, but it's very important because it depends on it whether this model is stable. Yes, thank you. Well, Nadia was to participate in this discussion, but she could not. She's away on business. I'm not a businessman, and moreover, I don't deal with SMEs. I deal with business-oriented services. And I will provide an answer which is more technological, and I would rather bring it closer to the subject of this discussion. I think the best way to protect the interest of our clients, and the bank is bank focuses on client. It's the most important thing for the bank is providing for their rights. Well, apart from the thing that we need to provide an attractive service and applications and functionality to the client that makes the client stay with us and not go to our competitors, still more important is providing the safety of the client. That is making everything possible so that the client, while interacting with our bank, with other financial partners of our bank, with other companies, that they do not lose money. Because the level of fraud is high, it remains high, it will grow. Actually, this hype around digitalization, well, I look at it with a smile from the height of my experience in the banks. I've been with the bank for 25 years. Actually, digital services and digital financial services have been in existence ever since the early 80s, because SWIFT is also a digital service. Now everyone's talking about it, and it's becoming a big problem because it became a commodity. So there's a wide range of participants of financial services take part in that digital dissemination of financial services, and that is thanks to fundamental achievements in microelectronics, in telecom, in production of new materials, in new efficient energy sources. When we all have a device like that, some gadget like that, which allows us to provide communication around the day so that we can have contact with supply of any services. And 20 years ago, it was impossible. Now this computer that's inside this gadget is more powerful than a PC of 20 years ago. That was the first stage of revolution. The first stage to digital services was in the 80s. Now we've reached another stage. And 10 to 15 years later, probably, we will have the input device on our retina. And what I mean is that by expanding the possibilities of technology and accessibility of those services, we come to the necessity of regulating it. I'm not an opponent of regulation, and actually I'm a proponent of regulation, because alongside with those new possibilities and accessibility of those services and the possibility to develop those products and place them on the web, provide those services to everyone, that brings a question: what's inside? What's in this code? Or where do my data go? What does the developer put into that code that he develops for me? And so to protect the consumer, to protect the client, I would introduce certain reasonable limitations related to possible certification of licensing of those financial services, especially for the cases that was mentioned early in this session, when you don't know where to go, when the service is rendered virtually. So, in my opinion, a certificate saying that this service is rendered using correct technology and doesn't contain any dangerous content, I think that would be correct. And recalling the initial slides of our meeting, which spoke about the items which need to be regulated, I would support this idea, and in that sense, I'm your ally. Well, certainly the balance must be also provided. Thank you for this technological outlook. It's also very important. Lately, we have kind of forgotten about Moore's law. 5 to 7 years ago, we talked about Moore's law, which is an empirical law of the 70s, that the productivity of transistors or microchips doubles every 18 months, if I remember correctly. Since it's a geometric progression of the growth of production capacity is huge. When I was in the third year at the university, I bought, spending all of my money, a computer that was DX2486 with a 4 megabyte video card with 40 megabyte HD. And that was huge, and all of my friends from all over the city came to me to play Doom. Now it isn't even funny. Although, well, practically very little time has passed, but the speed is colossal, so we don't know what will be the development of the capacity in 20 years. Futurology is an interesting thing. It was fashionable to make forecasts for 20 to 30 years ahead. Recently, they analyzed all the forecasts, and actually, they could guess what would happen in 3 to 5 years, and nobody could guess about the web, although this communication system between the American universities was already there. Nobody could guess what it will become. So the fundamental changes occur by chance, and because that is becoming technologically easy and cheap, and we don't know what will change in 25 years, how we will interact with the consumer. But there's an important issue here, what is changing in the consumer behavior. Because the change in the consumer response, especially the young consumers, the Z generation, is very important for forecasting the market in 5 or 7 years. So let's change the angle of view, and I would like to Maxim Grigoriev to look with the consumer's eyes. Well, I fully agree, and really the current disruption is based on technologies and the development of technologies, but it is well known from the experience of previous revolutions, technologies are important drivers, but unless the style of life change, unless the operation model changes, the companies do not survive. By the way, we do not need slides. Unless the style of life change, unless the operation model changes, there are very negative consequences in relationship to client, and that's a very important change. And if we recall the plenary session at Phinopolis 2 years ago with Oleg Tinkov and others, and one of the consultants said, well, we must be client-oriented, client-centered, etc. And Gref and Tinkov said, aren't we client-oriented? And we decided we must be client-centered, and that is very important. It's absolutely necessary in the digital epoch. And actually, there was Brad Kinn, the keynote speaker at the previous Phinopolis, and he said there's zero principle design from the scratch. You need to be based on the feelings and client experience and create what the client needs. So the whole story should be turned upside down, and it's very important. And actually, the central bank is a very progressive regulator in this sense. A few years ago, they set up a consumer rights service, and they provided the protection of rights, and they made the focus on that, and that actually helps the central bank activity in this area. And that was noted 2 months ago when we had a global conference of Alliance for Financial Accessibility. I think there were about 500 heads of banks, national banks, and it was noted that actually Russia is going in the right direction concerning the financial accessibility. Our strategy is based on digital driver as one of the most important drivers. And we all, as participants of the financial market, must transform our operational model and center on the client without forgetting of security. And there's a less tangible aspect called ethics. And actually, this Monday there was a Gartner respond about technological trends for the next year, and the issues of privacy and ethics were mentioned as one of the cornerstones for the first time. According to this study, by 2021, companies will spend twice as much on compliance if they don't use best practices in ethics and privacy. And certainly it's very important to look at our future clients. Well, 20% of them are Generation Z clients, and probably we need to base our digital services on the habits of this new generation. And Mikhail was absolutely right. Our studies also show that Generation Z is more pragmatic, and strange as it may seem, quite often they tend to buy in-house. They do not always trust the digital channels. On the other hand, they are used to multi-channels, and your brand must look identically on all the channels. And Gardner, again, the multi-channels mentioned multi-channels as something that goes to the despair valley. Omnichannality is important, and you need to apply a new approach to the young people, the community, the social networks. They need experience, they need gamification, and they're used to the thing that digital services are nearly free of charge for the client. It's ideally customized, and it's instant. And again, safety and security. Thank you, Maxim, for this outlook. Colleagues, we have a few minutes for questions and answers. Should you have any, just raise your hands and identify yourselves and ask them. Yes. Questions? Anyone brave in this room? Well, then, I have an express question while you are thinking. While the questions are happening, I have a question to the speakers. We've been talking a lot about the future, and my question is, when do you think, in how many years, bank offices will be no longer needed to interact with the client? Well, let's go right to left. My firm opinion, they will always need them because you can digitize some standard services, but there's always non-standard situations, need for consultations, human interaction. I remember an old research, and they really asked one of the banks about their clients, and they could not digitize more than 80% of their clients. So I believe that bank offices will always be there. Well, the marginal stories will be there, okay? One respected banker from a yellow bank who regularly speaks, he said that we won't have offices in 5 years. But that prediction did not come true, so you must be very careful with predictions, because people will remember what you said. So you need to be responsible for your words. In my opinion, and we thought about it, whether we would have offices or not. But I think that the offices will cease to exist, and there's a trend towards that. And how will that happen? Now, the main consumers of financial services or banking services is the generation who are from 30 to 60 years of age, and people of about 40 and 50 use most of the financial services, and they are consumers. These people are used to a certain way of consuming financial services. It's not necessary for them to go to the office. You need to have office close at hand, and maybe they come to the office once a year or do not come at all. The people of the age group 18 to 25, their way of interaction with the banks is different. It's not very important for them to have a physical office. But so far, they don't have much money at their disposal. Alexander, number. So as soon as this first generation leaves and the next generation comes, so that's 15 years, well, 15 plus 10, so that's 10 to 15 years, not earlier. Well, a safe forecast. Damir. I think it depends on the bank profile, on its key segment. If they're focused on mass segment or on young people, that may happen even within 3 to 5 years. And if it's affluent or high net, and just imagine servicing high net without offices, and probably that would become a privilege. And I will say that the offices will always be there, needed for some, but in some segments they can disappear in 3 to 5 years. Well, nobody recalls the fact that we have a bank without offices, and it works. Well, we didn't call them. Natalia. Well, my forecast is, I think that the physical presence will always be there, but in 3 years we'll see a change in format. That's something was mentioned yesterday. We'll see a shift from offices where I say to talk to the teller or an operator about, maybe it's an office in a cafe, office in a library, but there will be a different format. Thank you. Victor? Actually, it's a very difficult question, strange as it may seem. And you've stolen the best part of my question, so why offices? I think offices are not needed. So let's ask, I will reformulate your question. Let us prohibit banks to have offices tomorrow. Will our system collapse or not? Let's prohibit offices. Will our system collapse? The answer is no. The banks will continue to function. Our society will continue to function. Naturally, we'll have a segment of pensioners or retired people, but they don't go to bank offices too often. Why do they have to go? Well, let they socialize in a drugstore. Well, you are being tough. So I believe the correct answer is that this is something in the head. It's people are scared to close down offices, but actually the offices can be closed in 3 years, leaving the emergency points of service. And the example of Tinkoff or many other countries like Finland, which wrap up the offices work 1 day a week, and nobody complains.
Yes, I thought about that 4 months ago. I visited a branch office. I needed a certificate, the stamp, and I needed the stamp. That's why I went there. But Tinkoff can do that in PDF format. If you print that using a very good printer, it looks like a very good stamp. You propose revolutionary ideas. Vladimir. This is a sensitive question for you. Well, I think that the offices will still be there, but I would like to agree with Natalia that there will be a shift in the format. The format will be changed, and it will offer other services, and the basic needs will be satisfied in digital services, and to bring payment requests, it will be quite easy, and the banks, the offices will be used for some emergency situations. And as the futurologists forecast, they said that the radio and the bookshops will no longer be there in the future, but still they are there, and people go there with pleasure. Strange as it may seem, but I go there as well. The format will change, the offices will still be there, and there will be some percentage of people who will not use digital services. And for some non-standard cases, we will need the offices, because the digital services will not resolve those tasks. We don't know how many offices we will have, but I think it will be fewer ones, but still we will have them. But that is my forecast. We didn't reach a consensus, different viewpoints, different assessments. We had the video broadcast, and you can go back, you can watch it afterwards and see who was right. Katya Andreeva said always that time will show us what will happen in the future. I'd like to thank our speakers for their creative thinking, for their creative viewpoints, and I think that we'll go back to the perception of digital services, and we will go back to this at every Phenopolis, because as we are all consumers, it is a very important thing for us. Thanks, everyone.